Coming up this weekend, an absolute grappler's paradise. We have Jonny Munoz. His nickname's Kid Kvenbo because that was his dad's nickname, and his dad was pretty damn good at jiu-jitsu. Gonna be taking on Tony, no nickname, Gravely. And when it comes down to this fight, I absolutely love it. From Tony, I'd say you know exactly what you're going to get because he wrestled at Appalachian State. He was a D1 college wrestler, and he parlayed that into a great career on the regional scene, champion time and time again. And then he comes into the UFC and he really makes his mark. He's had a lot of very fun fights. And I know Brett Johns isn't in the UFC anymore, but that was a fight of the night in his debut. Lose that one by rear naked choke, but it was a lot of fun. Win over Geraldo de Freitas. Win over Anthony Burchak by knockout. Poor Anthony, his second time in the UFC, did not go well.
No, it did not.
A loss to Nate Maness, his second to last time out, and then a big win over Simon Oliveira. A fight that I think really pertains a lot to this matchup against Jonny Munoz Jr. But I say for Tony Gravely, I was given a bill of goods, and I've gotten what I expected out of it, but I will say, when you go back and look at Tony Gravely's fight that he has against Anthony Burchak, where he knocks him out, he then goes into the fight against Nate Maness like, okay, yeah, I'm a premier wrestler, I hold guys down, and I tire them out, and I just beat them down. And he went, okay, I'm a boxer now. I'm going to fight Nate Maness. And it worked out great in the first round against Maness. The last 2 seconds of that fight, it's just like Alejandro Perez when he fought Jonathan Martinez. Overhand right, ends the round, drops Nate Maness, does Tony Gravely. And you look at Maness, trying to clear the cobs, his face is right up against the cage. His corner just picks him up, throws him in the corner, puts him back on the stool. He gets back up, still looks like he's not totally there. And then they slug it out, and Maness ends up landing a shovel uppercut, drops Gravely, and then he finishes him. And the referee let it go a little bit longer than I would have enjoyed. But for Gravely, his next time out, he fights Simon Oliveira, a guy that fought on the regional scene, fought on Contender Series, had a lot of good front chokes, and that was pretty much the story of that fight. Gravely wrestling, beating him down. Oliveira going like anaconda, going guillotine. Gravely pulling out of it and ending up getting the win there. Taking on Kid Kvenbo in Jonny Munoz Jr. His dad runs the school that he had joined as a young boy, Sequence Jiu-Jitsu. He's a 4-time all-state high school wrestler was Gravely, but if you look at it for Munoz Jr., big-time multiple IBJJF champ in Jiu-Jitsu. So it's premier wrestling against premier Jiu-Jitsu. And for Munoz Jr., to look at him when he strikes, he doesn't look like a grappler. He looks like a karate guy maybe? He has a really weird stance, and I'm eager to see what we get out of him this weekend.
And that's the fun thing about this fight, like how you set it up. I do look at this fight as a primary grappler fighting a primary grappler. But if we did get 15 minutes of these guys striking, it wouldn't be a bad fight by any means. It would still result in a fairly fun one. Because for Gravely, you're right. It's very interesting, the career of Tony Gravely, and especially his UFC run, because it just kind of makes you think, okay, anytime you ever played a sport in your own life, when you tried too hard, what happened? You'd mess up, you'd make a mistake, you'd overthink it.
Kid swinging out of his shoes.
Someone would swing out of their shoes, you'd miss a curveball by 9 feet. Like, you would always make yourself look worse than you want to. But when you're just flowing with it, when you're just not really thinking about it, and you're just sort of letting the motions happen, then 9 times out of 10, nothing bad's going to happen. You're going to look really good. For Gravely, when he doesn't overthink things, I think he does get into that state to where, hey, he can strike and mix in his wrestling at the same time. He doesn't just go in there to box and then to wrestle if things go poorly. He goes in there to have an MMA fight. And I think if he goes in there with that kind of a mindset against Jonny Munoz Jr., he could have a ton of success. But this is the other thing about Gravely that I don't love in all of his fights, and I think you'll appreciate this. He does have good defensive grappling, I would say. He has been caught by submissions, don't get me wrong. But it seems like every fight he has ever been in, win, lose, or draw, he's caught in a guillotine for like 20 seconds. And he's fighting it, and fighting it, and fighting it. And there's always that like 5-second period where you're like, oh, goodness, Tony just went for a takedown, and now he's getting himself submitted. And I do really worry about that in this matchup, because against Munoz, I think Munoz is the level of grappler who is like a Nick Lentz against Will Brooks, for instance. I think he can allow Gravely to get on top of him, take him down, do some things in a way that might not actually help Gravely as this fight goes on. I think Munoz could set up traps as he allows Gravely to get on top of him, and I do think that as the fight progresses, Because Gravely is one of these wrestlers who, if he gets 11 takedowns on you, you know he's going to go for the 12th one. I could see Munoz letting him take him down over and over and over again, just until he gets that perfect guillotine choke or that perfect defensive submission. It's almost like fighting like a grappling version of Uriah Hall, kind of, but I really think that could work out for him in this type of a matchup.
And for Munoz Jr., young enough, he's not one of those guys that as the fight goes on, usually for a grappler, you're at a disadvantage. Everybody gets sweaty and everybody gets tired, and it's just more difficult to sync up a submission. You look at Jonny Munoz Jr., the quality of grappler he is, and it really is something special. Now, if we go back through just the 2 UFC fights that he has had, you can make a very strong argument that he beat Nate Maness, but then the question is, okay, what's more effective? Stalling for the takedown to work it, or the little tiny shots that Maness was able to land? There was a low blow in the 3rd round that resulted in a point deduction for Munoz, but there was a lot of questions as to whether or not he won that fight. So you could arguably say Munoz beat Maness. Gravely almost did, and then he got finished. It was like Daniel Rodriguez when he fought Dwight Grant. But you look at the last fight that Munoz had, and there's a big step up from the Wisconsin wrestler that is Jamie Simmons and Tony Gravely. But against Jamie Simmons, Jonny Munoz Jr. looked terrible in the 1st round. His accuracy was some of the worst volume striking I've ever seen. He was hitting at I think it was like a 17% clip, but it really was. He kept his hands right here, balls of his feet, jab to the air, right hand to the air, back to it, waiting to bait his opponent in. And then in the 2nd round, he just went for his takedown, got it, took the back, and then it was a lot of hand fighting before he got the submission and tapped out Simmons. Jonny Munoz Jr. is that nth degree grappler, whereas Tony Gravely is that wrestler in this division, like a Cody Stamann, like these other guys at 135, Dan Argueta that you're going to see later on in this card. Very, very similar fighters. So I look at the odds here. Gravely open to -150 favorite, -142 right now. Jonny Munoz Jr. open to +130, +116. So odds shifting in favor of Kid Kvenbo. We have a look at the Tapology votes. Surprised to us as they are to you. I'm going to say over under 65% on the more familiar Tony Gravely here.
I'll say over.
I'm going to say over. It is over. 1,227 total votes. 71% Gravely. 84% by decision for the 29% that have Mr. Munoz Jr. 36% by decision. 44% by submission. So, Matt, the fans are in agreement with us, so it seems, and they're thinking that Munoz Jr. could pull out the submission victory. Do you think he's going to get it this weekend?
I agree with the layout of the Tapology votes. I really do, because again, I think Gravely's either going to win like a 30-26 type of a decision, or go for that takedown, that last takedown he probably shouldn't, and find himself into a submission. I think it probably will be a one-way or another kind of a fight, sort of that one-way traffic. So that's why I'm going to pick Tony Gravely. Again, it's not my most confident pick on the card because the one area in which he can have the most success is also going to put him into quite a bit of danger with Jonny Munoz Jr. But I do think Gravely on the feet can damage Munoz to where I'm not sure if Munoz can put together enough shots to really hurt Gravely on the feet. It could happen. I've been wrong before. I'm sure I'm going to be wrong again. But if Gravely, let's say he does duck for a takedown, come over with an overhand right, that's a genuinely damaging strike that could change the whole outlook of this fight. So that's why I like Gravely in this matchup.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I mean, Gravely with so much experience, 29 pro fights to the 12 of Munoz Jr. The only loss on Munoz Jr.'s record, you could argue he won it, but when it comes down to even just that singular fight that he lost, if he took on a guy like Tony Gravely, there's no way that fight would have taken place or gone the way that that one did. For Gravely, he can pretty well dictate the pace of this fight on the feet. He can dictate it with his wrestling, but then once he gets into that, we start to get into a gray area where Munoz's overall jiu-jitsu game could take over. So I like those parts of Gravely's game. I will pick him to win this fight, but like you said, this is one of the tougher ones on the card. So both of us going with the man representing American Top Team in Tony Gravely of no nickname. But you let us know down below in the comment section because this is one of the fights that I'm most excited about coming up this weekend. We get some big ones on this card. Ige taking on Evlev in the co-main event. Rozenstruik challenging Mr. Alexander Volkov in that main event. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, and as we always say, let's get into it.